I spent one entire year trying to make $1 million from scratch. And after 365 days of pushing myself, working hard, and trying an insane amount of different side hustles, I'm gonna share what I learned about making money, what I tried that worked insanely well, and how much I actually ended up making after just 1 year. So before I started the 1 Million project and before I tried any of these side hustles, I owned a business filming high-end luxury weddings. It was awesome. I made around $120,000 a year, working between 12 and 15 weekends out of the year. I got to work from home for myself all week long, and I was able to turn my passion of filming and editing into a full-time income for me and my family. My dream had been realized. My life was going places, my business was going places, up until the point that everything absolutely collapsed. By March 2020, I had already booked enough weddings to make over $100,000 that year. And because of coronavirus and lockdown, I went from expecting to make $100,000 to almost overnight having zero income. And I cannot overstate how depressing and just terrifying that really was. Almost overnight, I had lost $100,000 of expected income, and I didn't know what I was going to do to pay the rent, to pay the bills, and to feed my family. Because of this, I really sunk in this depression and this victim mentality of, this isn't fair, this shouldn't have happened, I'm so unlucky, and just this general negative attitude. And I started eating waffles all the time, which is kind of weird, but I guess waffles are kind of like my comfort food. And I started playing video games and just really distracting myself from the reality that everything was falling apart. I had no plan or no way to fix it, and I didn't know what to do. And it was, scary. Luckily, that only lasted a couple weeks before my wife was like, hey, stop feeling sorry for yourself. You're being dumb. Figure something out, which was all true and exactly what I needed to hear. I started reading a lot of entrepreneurship books, marketing books, business books, started listening to a lot of podcasts. I started looking at my own schedule and the way I was doing things, trying to refine them, knowing that I kind of had to transform who I was, my routine, my knowledge set, my skill set, and become something more if I was gonna be able to handle this huge problem and this huge obstacle that had been thrown in my way. And it was around this time I had a friend, Caleb, who had started to get some traction on TikTok. He had like 5,000 followers, and I was mind blown that so many people followed him. And he was like, hey, you should jump on TikTok and start posting some of the things you're learning. So I did. I started, just with my phone, I started recording videos, just teaching kind of some of the stuff I was learning and sharing my journey. And almost overnight, I started getting traction. I started really taking off, where within a month, I had 20,000 followers. And by the time August rolled around, I had over 40,000 people who were following my account, which is way more than I'd ever had following me in my entire life before that. And although I was taking off on TikTok, I was still struggling financially to bring in any sort of income, but it gave me sort of this idea of creating this epic challenge to really push myself out of my comfort zone, throw down a gauntlet and say, hey, I'm gonna attempt to do this crazy thing. You guys get to watch me and let's just see what happens. And eventually I came up with the idea of the 1 Million project. The idea was to start with $1 as my only monetary asset to use and try to make $1 million in a year. So I created a video on TikTok saying I was gonna try to do this, and I launched the project in late August. And when I launched, a lot of people were really confused about the $1 and like, was I gonna trade the dollar or how did that work? And just to really kind of clarify that, the idea behind the $1 is that was my only monetary asset to be able to be used in the project. And the reason I did that is because say I had $100,000 in the bank and I was using that to invest to make income. Well, for me, that felt like it was kind of cheating because, it's really easy with $100,000 to make a decent income source. If you have a lot of money, you can make a lot of money. If you had $10 million and you just invest it in the stock market, well, you can make $1 million in a year pretty easily. Money can make other money. So my only monetary asset I started out with was $1 just to show that I was truly doing it from scratch. So after I announced it and launched the project, I didn't really have a plan on how I was actually going to make $1 million in a year. I hadn't really even thought through that part, which seems kind of ridiculous now thinking back at it. But I just wanted to, kind of motivate myself to do something crazy by just announcing it and then figuring it out as I went. And so that's exactly what I did. My goal for week 1 was to make $1,000. And so I started brainstorming ways I could do that given the skill set that I had. My first idea was doing some sort of marketing thing, maybe building some websites for different local businesses. So I started cold calling just hundreds of different businesses locally. And it was a real struggle. If you've ever seen my cold calling video, you know that I absolutely suck at cold calling so hard. And it was really similar to when I did all these cold calls. I was not very good at it at all. And I actually got zero traction from any of those cold calls. But I kept trying it every single day till eventually I got to literally the day before I was supposed to announce my first week's results, and I'd come up with absolutely nothing. And so I started brainstorming again, just any way I could make any sort of money. And I thought of, well, I have a friend, Lucas, who had been asking me if I could possibly put together some gifts for him because he wanted to send his clients different gifts of himself when he was talking to them. So I called him up and said, hey, I could do those gifts for $100. Would you be down for that? He said yes, and that's how I pulled in my first $100. And then randomly, I ended up getting this call from this guy from Clearbank, and he was interested in teaching me about the tool they had, which was basically a way for entrepreneurs that owned Shopify stores or different things like that to raise capital for their business. I looked at it as a last desperate opportunity to make the money I needed to reach my $1,000 goal. So instead, I told him about what I was doing with the 1 to 1 Million project, my goal, and I asked them if they would be willing or interested in sending me the money I needed to reach my 1,000 goal for the week. It was a weird, awkward conversation and definitely something I wouldn't normally do, but I was just so desperate to hit my goal that it was the only option I really felt like I had left. And surprisingly, this guy was totally interested in helping me out. He was also just a total hustler, trying to, build a reputation for himself within the company. He had gotten hired by the CEO after the CEO had met him and just kind of saw a spark in him, just saw that he was a little bit different and said, hey, I want you on my team. I want to sort of mentor you. So this guy ended up getting the CEO on the phone. I actually have a recording of him talking to the CEO.
Hey, what's up, buddy?
How's it going?
I'm good. Sorry, I've got like 2 minutes. What's up?
I need 20 seconds from you.
And got the approval for this money to get PayPal'd over to me just literally right on the spot. It felt like a massive win hitting my goal the very first week, and definitely something that kind of inspired this real belief that I could accomplish my goal in just a year of making $1 million. From that point forward, I was determined to never miss my weekly goal that I set for myself. And the next week ended up coming and I was a little bit short of my weekly goal. So I decided, you know what? I have a PS4. I'm going to go sell that. And I just went around my house looking for different things I could sell on Facebook Marketplace. And I sold a bunch of stuff just to hit my weekly goal because I was so determined not to fall behind on the project. But obviously selling things on Facebook Marketplace and doing $100 photo shoots wasn't going to get me to $1 million. It wasn't a sustainable method to get there. So at the same time, I was really trying to figure out what in the world I was going to do to start making real money to get to $1 million. So I basically started saying yes to any crazy random idea that I had. And it led to some really unusual places and some unusual successes as well. I tried Facebook ads really early on and it ended up being a failure. I tried Pinterest ads really early on, that ended up being a failure. Another thing that I tried really early on that ended up being one of the biggest successes that I had during the whole journey was content creation for brands. And this wasn't something that I actually sought out. What ended up happening is I had gotten this message or email. I don't even remember if it was an email or a comment or what. But this guy had reached out to me and he'd basically been wanting to talk to me about TikTok ads. Anyways, he'd sent me an email and wanted to set up a time to talk on Zoom. He came to me and asked me if I could run TikTok ads for them. I had to be honest and say, no, I cannot run TikTok ads for you because I have no idea how to do that. But I didn't want to let go of the opportunity and I want to see if there was a way I could also help solve his problem, but in a way that I knew how to do. At the time I was reading a book called Never Split the Difference. It's all about negotiation tactics. So obviously I was trying to apply my best negotiation tactics when I was talking to him. In the book Never Split the Difference, he teaches you that you're supposed to use something called extreme price anchoring. And it's a way to make the price that you're offering seem like a smaller price. Think of, for example, if you were to buy a tuxedo and it's a $600 tuxedo and somebody offers you an $80 tie, it doesn't seem that weird. Now, if you were to just go to the store and somebody offered you an $80 tie, that might seem absurd. And that's because your mind's anchored to that price of that $600, suit. And so, $80 seems like a much smaller amount. Same thing when you buy a house and, you're buying a $500,000 house and somebody's like, we got to do a $5,000 inspection. You're like, okay, it doesn't seem like that weird of a thing. But if somebody were just to come to you and say, hey, I'm going to clean up your yard for $5,000, that would seem, like a much higher price. So what I wanted to pitch him was this idea about consulting on their TikTok account to help them grow organically. I thought that that could be a valuable service to their brand. I know a lot of people have made a decent amount of money selling physical products on TikTok. His product was already a really popular physical product. So I would consult on his TikTok account to help him grow and get more of an organic following. So I wanted to use extreme price increase. So I pitched a second offer where I would do all the editing, do all the filming, write all the scripts for $10,000 a month. Now, hands down, I was expecting that just to make my offer of $2,000 a month for the consulting seem like a way better deal. What ended up happening instead is he said, okay, I'll choose the $10,000 a month package, which absolutely blew me away. It took me from, barely reaching my goal to absolutely blowing my goal away, and then giving me, on top of that, $10,000 a month I was gonna be making consistently month after month from that point on. And that did end up working out. He signed the contract, wired over the money, and I was able to create content for their brand, getting paid $10,000 a month to do it. Despite getting that $10,000 a month contract, obviously $10,000 a month would only get me to $120,000. It wasn't enough to get me to my $1 million goal. So I had to keep really brainstorming on what was gonna actually get me to my $1 million goal. I launched projects doing Google Ads. I launched projects doing web design. I tried postal mail marketing, which was like this idea I came up with after reading a book, and it ended up being a total success. I also, with my buddy Lucas, was able to launch a company called Revenue that helped restaurants market better. And so slowly but surely, I started to get all these different income sources bringing in money into my bank account, where I was now making more than I used to make filming weddings. It was around this time that I had somebody in like the comments or somewhere recommend me the book 12 Months to 1 Million, because obviously that's, its title was literally what I was doing. I read the book. It was all about e-commerce and launching a physical product. And after reading the book, I loved it, and I was convinced that the way that I was gonna get to my $1 million goal was launching a physical product brand. So I came with a product that I thought would help people and really add value, and that was the Entrepreneur's Planner, a planner to help people who are on their own entrepreneurship journey really focus in, take massive action, and get things done. It had been something that personally really helped me on my journey. And my focus and my beliefs always been helping other people solve their problems, helping them achieve success. And by doing that, you're gonna achieve your own success and solve your own problem. And I made a whole video about how I created a product and manufactured it if you wanna check it out. Anyway, it's a really long story, but basically I ended up manufacturing this entire planner from scratch, having it shipped straight to my house. And during this whole process, I was really wrestling with the rules of 1 to 1 million, which they were really vague. I hadn't really stated necessarily any rules, except for I was starting with $1 and trying to get to $1 million profit in a year. But one of the reasons I was doing this was because I really wanted to inspire and help anyone else who felt kind of hopeless and depressed like I had. And I was wrestling with this idea of launching a planner to my audience just because I knew some people would immediately use that as an excuse to say, hey, well, you can do it because you have this big audience, but that doesn't help me at all. And although I'd essentially built the audience as a part of my journey to 1 million, and I felt like it was a legitimate tool and asset I should be utilizing, I was still very conflicted about the whole thing. And because of that, I didn't really put much effort or promotion into the launch. I just kind of did a really small launch with my planner. I ended up making a decent amount of money. I paid off all the money I had initially had to spend to buy the planners and get them manufactured, and I made a decent profit of a few $1,000s off of it. But I kind of gave up on that vision before I really even ever got started, because I really wanted people to be able to say without any doubt, like, because he was able to do it, I could also do the same thing. Which led me straight back to where I started, which was at the drawing board, not really knowing how I was gonna get to my $1 million goal. And if all this is just seeming like it's all over the place, so confusing, and like I'm literally just making this up as I go, that's because that's exactly what it was. I was just making up everything as I went. I'm a normal person. I was no more qualified or experienced to be doing any of this than any other person would be. I had never made $1 million before, so I had no idea how to make $1 million. I was just guessing and trying my best to figure out a way to get there. And I was doing, in general, pretty dang good. By my 6-month mark, I had made over $100,000. And it was around or pretty close to the 6-month mark when I finally started getting into crypto for the 1 to 1 million project. So outside of the 1 to 1 million project, this is also a thing that confuses a lot of people. I had money in my bank account, okay? When I started with $1, starting 1 to 1 Million project, I had more than $1 in my bank account. I never used that money for the project. I never took advantage of that money to make me any money for the project. And in general, I stayed within the confines of what I set for the overall rules and expectations of the project. But I did have that money, and it was a decent amount that I had saved up over the years working weddings, just in case some crazy emergency ended up happening. On top of that, I started investing in cryptocurrency in early 2017. So I was already pretty familiar with crypto. I just hadn't done anything with it with the project or the money that I had earned from the project. But once I'd gotten to, $80,000, $90,000 and I had a lot of money just kind of sitting there doing nothing for me, I decided, hey, crypto's going crazy. I need to be investing this to get my money to start working for me. I ended up starting with Stoic, and then I started doing just a few other cryptocurrency investments. With the money I'd earned from the 1 to 1 Million project, things started going out of control. They started taking off. I was making crazy amounts of money. I think one week I made like $16,000 just from the growth of my crypto assets. Everything was looking good, and I was getting to a point where I was thinking, geez, maybe I could hit my $1 million goal from just crypto alone, crypto investing. And I made a huge mistake of taking out leverage on my crypto assets, and maybe the worst moment in all of history of all time ever. I decided to take out leverage on my crypto assets the literal day, literally the exact day before the entire market crashed. There could not have been a worse time for me to have made that decision than that exact day. And because of that, I ended up losing over $22,000 overnight. And it was a huge setback for the project. I'd gotten all the way up to almost $130,000 in the span of just like a week or something. It was crazy. And then in the span of a day, I lost most of that and gone all the way back down to 100,000. On top of that, a lot of things went wrong all at the same time. For one, I stopped doing the $10,000 a month contract. It was a lot of work. It took up 2 days of my time, and they weren't seeing the sales that they were hoping for. I had ended up taking the account from like 500 followers to over 50,000, but on the sales side, they weren't seeing the sales that they had hoped for. And on top of that, I just moved to a new city where I knew no one. All my friends were back, in my hometown, and just everything started to fall apart all at the same time. But something that was really interesting to me at this point was that although things were really not going good at that point, I felt a lot different than I had when I lost my business. I had kind of changed over the course of, those 7 months into a lot different of a person than I had initially started the journey as. I'd recognized that I was a lot stronger and more resilient than I had previously been. And although I was obviously, not happy about all the things that were happening, it wasn't something that was crippling to me. It wasn't something that caused me to absolutely fall apart. It more just felt like a big bump in the road that I knew I would eventually overcome. So with all of that happening and me thinking, well, I probably can't rely on crypto for the near term to solve my problems, I need to get back to the drawing board. I had to come up with a new idea to get to $1 million now with not that much time left. One of the ideas was land flipping, which I got the idea from my father-in-law because he had done something like that. So I went down that path and got that experiment started, which ended up later down the line really paying off. I ended up doubling the money I invested, and then some. I made a decent amount of money doing land flipping. I came up with a coffee shop idea to start a coffee shop, which I talked about a lot on this YouTube channel, that really didn't end up going anywhere. Part of the reason it didn't end up going anywhere is because the crypto market took such a beating that a lot of the funds that I was like, well, I got all this extra money that I was gonna use for it kind of dried up. And I also had other people that were potentially going to be investors that also made a lot of money from crypto, their funds dried up. So I put that on pause for the time being. And plus I really added up the numbers and was like, you know what, I might get a valuation of $1 million from this, but I'm not gonna make $1 million realistically in profit from this in the short amount of time that I have. So there's a lot of brainstorming. I was reading a lot of books, and it was around this time I read the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, which is an amazing book. Absolutely amazing. I didn't think it'd be that good because the cover is super cheesy and it didn't just appeal to me. But the content and the book was amazing, and it really kind of struck this fire in me of passive income and really separating myself and my time from my work, and it kind of renewed this whole different focus. I started really looking at things that were more passive income opportunities and trying to figure out what that even meant, because a lot of people talk about passive income, but they do not explain what they're talking about. They're like, oh, you know, the goal is passive income. And then you're like, what's passive income? And they're like, you know, that's the goal. They never really, tell you how to start making passive income or what it takes or any of that stuff. Land flipping, I had kind of figured out, if I hired a virtual assistant to do this part and I automated this part, I could maybe potentially turn it into a passive income source where I wasn't necessarily having to do much work on it, maybe 1 or 2 hours a week. I started automating a lot more things that I was doing, just taking my time back so I wasn't having to spend so much time on these things. It's one of the reasons I got involved in AutoCake and Pancake Swap is because I was like, hey, this is a great way to make passive income. It's also one of the reasons I really just started heavily investing in YouTube, because YouTube is a great way to make passive income once you get it going. And the thing about passive income that a lot of people don't talk about is the fact that you either need a lot of money to make passive income, or you need to do a lot of work on the front end to make passive income. It's not just like there's ways out there where you can just get started and start making ridiculous amounts of passive income. I mean, there kind of is some ways like that in crypto right now for the time being, but that's a unique opportunity that probably won't be around for forever as the market evolves and change. But in general, you need either a lot of money or you need to do a lot of work on the front end. And YouTube's one of those things where you got to do a lot of work on the front end, but in the long term, it can be an awesome way to make passive income. Anyways, I'm sure you're all wondering how much I made actually after a year of trying to make $1 million in a year. The last thing I mentioned was losing that $22,000, which that was around month 9. And it took me all the way from like $120 something thousand all the way down to $104,000. And since then, I've been working really hard, trying to catch back up. And in 1 year of trying to make $1 million in a year, I made it to $147,343. And that's all profit. That's one thing that a lot of people get confused about is that's not revenue, that's profit. That's money in my bank, that's money in my pocket that I can spend. I gotta pay taxes. So I guess it's not all profit because I will have to eventually pay taxes on it. But people will talk about like Amazon stores and they'll talk about like drop shipping and they're like, I made $1 million. And what they're saying is they're making $1 million in revenue. That means they have $1 million coming through their account. That doesn't mean they're making $1 million profit. A lot of times, $1 million in revenue could be like $60,000 or $70,000 in actual profit that they get to take home, because there's the cost of the product, there's the cost of shipping, and there's various other costs that they're having to pay for along the way. When I say I made $147,000 in a year, I'm saying pure profit. Still though, is nowhere close to my $1 million goal. And honestly, I even had a shorter term goal of hitting 150,000 that even with my last kind of like push, I ended up not even hitting that. Although I did my best and I worked really hard over the past year, it ended up being way harder of a task than I initially had anticipated. And I ended up making a lot of mistakes, obviously, along the way that cost me a lot of time and a lot of money. But regardless, like, I'm definitely satisfied, I guess, with the result. Like, I'm not satisfied in the sense that I hoped to hit $1 million, but I'm not like disappointed. I only made $147,000. Like, that's still pretty awesome. It's more than I made filming weddings. And I've built up a massive audience on TikTok. I've built up my YouTube, and I've learned and acquired so much knowledge and ability along the way that it's been awesome and definitely well worth it. And I'm not giving up from this point either. I'm gonna continue on for a second year and see, can I make $1 million in 2 years starting from scratch? I mentioned in one of my videos recently that I'm working on launching an NFT collection with somebody I met on TikTok. I'm working on launching a new method to help creators make a ton of money launching their own brands and products. In general, I'm working on a ton of crazy passive income ideas along the way. I started this journey with $0 in passive income, and today I have over $5,000 I make in passive income in my sleep, that if I were to stop today doing all of my work, I would still make $5,000 a month. I could go vacation on the beach somewhere and do whatever people do on the beach and be making over $5,000 a month. And because I've learned so much, I'm really excited for this next year, because I'm gonna put all these things I've learned into practice and go at it from a different angle, a little bit more focused, a little bit more capable, and definitely with a lot more ability. And who knows what I'm gonna be able to achieve over this next year. If this video has been helpful, or I don't know, if you're just feeling bored and you want to hit my like button. It definitely helps my channel grow and it helps get this video out to more people. And I'm hoping that my journey can help inspire you and other people just to say, hey, I'm gonna try something, I'm gonna learn something, even if I'm gonna fail and not succeed at it, there's still things you can take away from it, and there's still just that joy and that challenge of pushing yourself and doing something you've never done before to become a just better version of you who's more capable and more resilient. If you like this video and want to see more content like this, make sure you hit the subscribe button and the little bell next to it. Let me know your questions in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.